Today, we are going to start our unit on assessment. And this unit is going to be fun because I'm going to have you guys try some stuff along the way. And I want to tell you this now. Over our next several lectures about assessment, I'm going to have you doing things. You need to hold on to all of it. Hold on to all of it, because your first homework assignment for this class is going to require that you use all of the assessments that you did throughout the next several lectures, and you're going to use them to do the homework assignment. So it's really, 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 really important that you hold on to this stuff, because you're going to need to consult it to do the homework assignment when we're done with the unit. All right, cool. So let's get started. If you look at slide number 2, I want to introduce you to the first type of assessment that we're going to do. Now remember, on the last video, the one that I posted earlier this week, I introduced the purpose of assessment, right? So we're going to start off with a category of assessment known as psychological tests or psychological inventories. And these can be either focused on one specific type of behavior or one specific type of disorder, or they can cover multiple symptoms that could potentially be relevant to multiple disorders. So some of these types of inventories focus on personality characteristics. Some of these inventories focus more on maladaptive behaviors that could be obstructing a person's ability to have quality relationships or occupational success. Some of these psychological tests or inventories focus on social skill types of things. Others focus more on vocational kinds of interests or interactions, which is more occupational stuff. And some focus more on cognitive impairment, so focusing more on your thought patterns, your interpretations, your beliefs, and your perceptions. And there are 3 types that we are going to talk about in this class: self-report inventories, or what are otherwise known as objective tests, and we'll talk about why they're called that. We're also going to talk about what are called projective or projective personality tests, much more controversial. And we're going to talk about intelligence tests. These all fall within the category of psychological tests and inventories. So let's get to it, shall we? Let's move on to slide number 3. We're going to start with self-report inventories, or what are known as objective tests. And the reason I want to start with these is they are by far the most often utilized type of psychological test or inventory in clinical assessment. So I'm sure you're going to do some for this unit, but I'm sure you guys have done these either for a research study. We're in the beginning video and I'm already talking in blah, 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 gobbledygook. I'm sure you guys have done these in some venue. If you've ever been a participant in a research study, you likely have done what's known as a self-report or objective test. The way these typically work is they use what is called in psychology a Likert scale. Likert scale. So a Likert scale is not dichotomous. It's not a yes or no. It's not a categorical kind of a thing. It is a graded continuum kind of a thing, where you choose a value across a number of values, and the difference in the value you choose indicates a difference in intensity. So for example, if I said, do you like ice cream? Use the following scale to answer. If I gave you a yes or no dichotomous kind of response inventory, you would just pick yes or no. If I gave you a Likert scale type inventory and you saw the question, do you like ice cream? I might have a scale like 1 to 4. 1, I hate it. 2, it's not my top choice. 3, I like it to some extent, but it's not my favorite. 4, I love it. Right? So it's not a yes or no. It allows you to indicate the degree to which you like the ice cream. That's a Likert scale. It gives us an opportunity to get intensity differences across participants that we're assessing. Okay? So you indicate your degree of agreement in the clinical inventories. You indicate your degree of agreement with typically self-descriptive statements. And so usually the Likert scale is either a 5-point or a 7-point scale, with the mid number being more of a neutral or moderate response. And you get a range of options from one extreme to the other. And so you might get something like, let's say it was a depression inventory, and you get a series of statements and you have to indicate your degree of agreement. Let's say one of the statements was, I feel sad. And then you might get numbers on the scale, like 1, never, 2, infrequently, 3, sometimes, 4, most of the time, 5, always. Okay, so again, it's not a yes or no. You indicate a degree of agreement with that self-descriptive statement about your depression or depression symptomology, like sadness. There's always, like I said, a moderate typically or a neutral midpoint. And one of the reasons that psychologists like using self-report inventories, or objective inventories as they're called, is that rather than give people binary options, either or, yes or no, it really gives us an idea about intensity differences. So if we're trying to look at, for example, the degree to which somebody's experiencing symptoms of anxiety or symptoms of depression, the Likert scale gives us a much better indicator of how severe or not so severe the experience of those symptoms are for that person, which is much better than a yes-no kind of a thing. And so this allows us to get degrees of severity, which is important because, as I told you in earlier videos, clinicians, one of the purposes of assessment is clinicians are trying to determine the severity, the nature, the course, the prognosis, so that they can devise a unique treatment plan that is most well suited to helping that particular person for whom they are doing the assessment. Okay, so there are some self-report inventories, and we'll talk about the MMPI in this lecture, the Minnesota Multiphasic Inventory, Personality Inventory. There are some that use a true-false response scale, which is more of a dichotomous or binary scale, categorical. And we'll talk about the problems with that. But more often we see these Likert scale type responses in a self-report or objective inventory. The most widely used, interestingly enough, though, is the MMPI. Again, the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory. And it is very, very, very long. We're going to talk about that in a moment. 567 items. 567 items. I want you to think about that. I'm sure you've been in a research study where you've been asked to complete these types of self-report inventories. You probably get sick of doing them after a while. Can you imagine one that has 567 statements on it and you have to respond true or false as to whether each of those 567 statements applies to you? Imagine how bored you might get after a while. You might start to wander attentionally and so forth. We're going to come back to that. The items comprise what are known as clinical scales. Now, it's not a perfect alignment with all of the diagnoses in the DSM, but the attempt is to use these clinical scales to help narrow down whether certain experiences behaviorally, cognitively, emotionally, etc., that someone might be having aligns with a particular subset of disorders in the DSM, which would then require further assessment to narrow down to which one or ones. Remember, comorbidity is possible. That's another purpose of assessment, to determine whether or not someone is experiencing more than one disorder at the same time. Now, there is a shorter version of the MMPI known as the restructured form. Well, now this one doesn't have 567. It has 338 items, also responded to with true or false. Better than 567, but 338 is still very long. Now, some self-report inventories, or objective tests as they're known, are focused on one specific disorder or one specific set of symptoms that align with a particular type of disorder. The MMPI covers multiple potential disorders in the DSM. Some only focus on symptoms of, say, depression, or generalized anxiety disorder, or substance use problems, or personality disorders. For example, one of the most commonly used assessments for depression is the self-report inventory known as the Beck Depression Inventory. We also have for phobias, the fear survey schedule. For OCD, which we will cover in this class relatively early in the semester, obsessive compulsive disorder, there is the Yale-Brown Obsessive Compulsive Inventory. For generalized anxiety disorder, we have the GAD-7. What makes these different than the MMPI is not that they aren't self-report or objective inventories. They are. And they have a similar type of Likert scale thing that we see with objective inventories. But unlike the MMPI, which assesses multiple symptoms of potential multiple disorders at once, these only focus on one type of disorder, phobias or depression or generalized anxiety or OCD. Okay, so I'm going to end this video here because our next video is going to focus specifically on the MMPI, because you really need to understand the MMPI when you're learning about assessment in clinical diagnosis, because it is by far the most often used among all the assessments that are used. So I will catch you on the next video.